just so that other people who wanted to be here but couldn't because they're in class right now can watch this later. And I'm going to turn this all over to Valaura now, and she will share her screen. Thank you very much. And there you go.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna try to stand here so you all could see me and they can see me too. So I'm gonna move this up a little bit, I think. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen as well here.
So the green, I think that's illuminated on the bottom where it says share screen. But you just want to click it, click up. Can you help her share the screen?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to get out of this full screen here.
Oh, go up to, actually, when you go to share screen, it'll do that for you.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm not putting it in full screen mode because I need my notes. You're gonna see all my notes here. Hi, I'm Valaura Imus-Nahsonhoya. I am the founder and executive director of Honwungsi Consulting. I'm happy to be. Hello? Oh, okay. I'm very happy to be here. This is our first time to Yuma. I've never been here before. However, we have served several Native American individuals who are from Kachan in Phoenix, though. So, you know, how many of us are Native here? One. Okay, great, great. So we are talking about missing and murdered of our Indigenous people, but also this isn't just happening to Indigenous people, it's happening to all of us, right? So a lot of this is heavy information. This is a lot of what we see. My husband and I, Brandon, he's my Mr. Vanna. And we have a missing persons trafficking recovery program. I'm also the state coordinator and tribal liaison for our missing and murdered Indigenous people ad hoc committee, and we're continuing having committee meetings. We've been to several tribes in Arizona, and our last one is going to be at the state capitol on December 9th. At 11 o'clock. So if you want to come down, you know, to listen, and we're also working on our recommendations of our families and survivors and those who provided testimony to improve some of our systems. I'll share all of that with you today. But I also want to share with you that, you know, part of my work is 20 years in victim advocacy, working with crime victims, empowering them. Our firm has also a youth and men empowerment program, which my husband leads, and his goal is, you know, to ensure that our boys and our men are also not necessarily accepting, but recognizing that a majority of perpetration is our male, and how could we reduce that, you know, and that's through our empowerment services, whether it's athleticism, whether it's education, you know, so these are some things that he does work with our young men and boys with. And also, I am an alum of NAU in Flagstaff. And I was sharing with Amy and the group last night that my goal was to be a nurse. And I didn't move forward with that because of a scare of hepatitis at Flagstaff Medical Center, and didn't know what I was going into, and found I could graduate that semester with a degree in health promotion and a minor in criminal justice. And criminal justice just really fascinated me, and I always had an interest in why perpetrators perpetrate. And I had a fortunate opportunity at NAU in my capstone course to where I was able to interview an inmate, a Hopi inmate who was on death row. So that just really took over, like, this is what I want to do. So I went on to school. I had my master's in criminal justice, and all of this is really, for me, a passion and a commitment that I have for this subject, this population. And this is why I do what I do. Recently speaking publicly about my own victimization and what happened to me, my story really solidified my purpose and why I do what I do. And you know, not only that, you know, it's empowered others to share their story even more so. Today, at this moment, he's got my phone. We are recovering an individual right now. So, you know, it's really exciting.
Arranging for survivors right now.
Yeah, so I thank you all and our Zoom participants for joining. You know, I'm sorry if I'm not directly talking to you because I have a live audience here too. I know that sometimes that's a little bit strange. So our presentation can be about an hour. If you have questions, I'll certainly keep the chat on or check the chat every so often. If you have questions through Zoom, I you know, enjoy participation as we go forward. I want to make this presentation meaningful to you. Whether you're writing a paper on this or you want to interview us or anything, we're certainly willing to assist in that as well. We have lots of stories. We have a lot of information that we would like to share with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Before I get started, I do want to share with you on your seats, you have these little sheets here. Information that we share, sometimes I'm very bold in my examples and the stories that I do have. And it's really about bringing the reality of what's happening, right? So some of my information can be, like I said, harsh, but at the same time, I want you guys to be able to learn and understand what this impact has on individuals and possibly those individuals that you might know that we didn't think about if that's happening in our own families or people that we do know. And I'm going to share with you some reality situations that's happening among our college students as well. So as we go on, my purpose today is really to help you understand what is missing and murdered of Indigenous people, the correlation of human trafficking as well, discuss some of the impact, some of our data, you know, that I want to be able to share, and how can we respond together, not necessarily, you know, and as for our staff here, you know, our students here, sometimes they develop the trust with you almost as a parent, right? And they might share things with you and you have your own policies of what this response is going to be like. But also, you know, they trust us because they found something in us that is much more than just staff. You know, it could be a friend, you could be almost their mother. You know, we're off to college sometimes, not without our parents, right? Without our family, and we find these trusting relationships with individuals. So before I get started, I'm going to try to play this video to give you a depiction as to what's happening here. So I'm going to see if it'll show. Oops. Okay, bear with me. I had it up earlier and it didn't. So there is a video called Torn Apart. This is a young man from Washington who did this and you know, he created this to share and depict what it looks like for Indigenous people when they're missing. So I'm just going to, it's the first 3 minutes. I hope Zoom can hear. Okay, hold on. I just realized I might not have put this onto Zoom. Sorry. Okay. Zoom participants, can you see now and hear? Yes.
Where are my keys? Where's my phone?
Drew, come on. I got her. Come on.
I'll call him, let him know we got another one. Hey, we got another one. We'll be there in 5 minutes.
Damn it, I dropped the keys.
No, we're totally good. It's completely empty out here.
God damn it.
Yes, I'm
shit.
sure.
Get her. Get over here.
Get away from me!
Okay. I shared this video because it depicts some of the reality as to what's happening. In our missing persons and sex trafficking recovery program, this is an example of the stories that we hear of individuals who are missing. This isn't the only example. We also have situations where individuals develop these relationships with people that they met, right? And trusting them to go off reservation or wherever they may go with this individual. But as we go further, you'll learn a little bit more as to what is really happening. So originally, this movement started from Canada, right? And it was the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And the reason why it was women and girls is because in Canada, they were recognizing an epidemic of women and girls who were missing and who were murdered. They did their own study and they found that a majority of them that were missing were coming down the state route and the main road coming down into the lower 48. And they were also finding bodies along the interstate who were Indigenous people. So, and a majority of them were women and girls. And they didn't know at the time, why was this happening? But this is how this movement got started. The lower 48 and the northern tribes got involved in this because we were also seeing individuals that were being sex trafficked and also missing, but we were finding them in the oil fields. Remember, in last few years ago, there was a huge oil fields that were opening in South Dakota and those states there. But that's where our indigenous people were also being trafficked. So, that was one of the highlights within that movement here in the States. But moving on further, although we've been doing this work since 2015, since the last Super Bowl, we were recognizing trafficking happening in Phoenix within what I call our metro tribes, Salt River, Hill River, Ak Chin, and we were all around the interstates. We had the accessibility to fly individuals out immediately, private helicopters or jets, they were flying individuals out immediately and not having to go through the processes of checking in and all of these things. And also the bus system in the valley, they got a bus ticket. There were at that time, we did witness, you didn't have to show an ID, but now we have to show an ID to get a bus pass. But then they would say they're a minor because they do look young, right? So most oftentimes minors don't have IDs. So this is how they were getting bus tickets for these individuals. But in addition to that, when we started this work, we were learning a lot. And I shared the story about, I needed to learn and understand what was happening. I put my life on the line every day in this work. But when I was wanting to be involved in Super Bowl, because we knew trafficking was happening, we knew there was no response for indigenous communities if something should happen. FBI trained me, they wanted, and I was actually in training when I was recruited. And the story that I tell in this is that, I went as far as I could with these individuals before I got pulled out of it. Every day I think if I just went one more step, like what would have happened, but I'm grateful that, my own, I guess, not really understanding it at the time as well, but others who knew my safety, pulled me at the right time. But I had an opportunity to have a conversation with that trafficker as we were talking. But I asked him, why are you interested in me? And my words and my choice of words wasn't the greatest at the time because I was like, I wanted all these answers, right? But in my earphones, I was like, no, don't directly ask that, but I wanted to know. And they just kept twirling their hair, putting their fingers through my hair. This one, he kept rubbing my hand like this, but they enticed me like, we want to take you shopping, and I had a purse with me and they wanted to get me, they mentioned Louis, they mentioned Gucci, to entice me to go with them. But when I think about the actual what was happening, that didn't interest me at the time. My interest was, what do you want from me? But at the same time, I had to show I'm vulnerable anyway. But I had to show much more vulnerability, to them. So I as soon as they told me, don't ask them direct questions, just go with it. And so I did, and it was interesting to know, what they were attracted to. They were attracted to me because of my hair and my skin tone. And for the reason, and we did know this later, and it wasn't validated until later, as we started working with survivors, is that, back then we had Backpage, right? And we were able to sell individuals through Backpage. But on there, they advertised dark hair, long hair, brown skin as different ethnicities. So I could have been advertised as Latino, I could have been advertised as Asian, Native American, and they titled us as exotic. On back page, the rose in there meant $100. So the minimum was 5 roses, which is $500 for an hour, right? So you calculate that and you imagine this trafficker has 5 girls at $500. Each of them go out to do a trick for an hour. That's what, $2,500 that this trafficker makes for 5 of his girls, right? So that was that revenue for them. Go ahead. Backpage was an online dating source, and the state, Arizona State, actually shut it down. It was used more here in Arizona. So it was a whole process, and to be part of that and those court hearings was amazing. We had individuals testify, and Backpage stole images off the web to say this is the girl, but when they actually get there, it's not that person, right?
And this was only for, it wasn't a legitimate site that had this also, this was only.
It was a
for-
legitimate
They
site,
sold other items.
but
as well.
it was like kind of like,
It's like
Craigslist.
kind of like a Craigslist.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah,
But
never
But
like-
Craigslist still has a dating site, right? And this is where they're also advertising. Yeah.
thank you.
You guys are aware of Craigslist and stuff like that, right? Okay.
But for furniture.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
well, there's a site that says dating now, and then there's a new term that says companion. So all of these words, this is where it's happening. But I haven't seen, I learned all of the emojis of what they all mean, but they don't use that in like Craigslist. They use the dollar signs in there, so, those are some of my experiences. I'm gonna be sharing a lot of experiences with you today. So missing and murdered of our Indigenous women, girls, what is the problem? We do know that our Indigenous people are at a much higher rate of being victimized. 10 times the national average in some US counties. We have 3 and 5 who are abused, whether it's domestic violence or sexual assault. For us here, I don't know how many people we have, but we count 1, 2, 3. You're a victim of sexual assault or some kind of an assault. 1, 2, 3. You're a victim of sexual assault. We go around the room. There's probably 6 of us out of this amount of who are victims of something, right? So it gives us the reality of what's happening with us in Indian country. But, we've also have recorded about 1,500 American Indian, Alaska Native people who were missing in particular counties. And I'm going to share with you what we've found here in Arizona. But more than 4 in 5 are experiencing violence. This is very debatable because some of us say 3 and 5, some of us say 4 and 5. But the data and why it's debatable is because the data is not accurate of what we're doing. We're not communicating between agencies of what this data is actually is. In tribal communities, we don't even have some data to collect. Law enforcement still use Excel spreadsheets, right? FBI and CIC, they don't communicate with tribes to really accurately depict what is really happening, right? And our state don't communicate with either tribal or federal. So there's no data communication is what we're seeing. So we know that there's a higher amount of cases. Even my cases was higher than what FBI reported at one time. So, these are some instances of how much we're just not communicating data wise, but some research is showing, some numbers, and we're showing numbers here in Arizona as well. Okay. So how this also gets started here in Arizona is Abby Echohawk from the Urban Indian Health Institute. did a report as well, and she studied 5,712 cases that we reported in 2016, but Tucson was number 3 for Arizona with the highest rate of Indigenous people who were missing and murdered. So this is why how we got involved is, you know, we at the time, Representative Winona Benali went to Las Vegas and learned about this issue. She came back to Arizona and said, we got to do something. Tucson is number 3. And she was from Tucson. So she really took the attention of this issue. She wrote the first draft. I read it. What I found in it is some of the barriers that it needed to be victim-centered, trauma-informed as well. We needed to ensure that we were listening to our families and our survivors respectfully and providing the services that they need after testimony. So my involvement in all of this has really grown. Now I'm the study coordinator for our state. And throughout this process as well, you know, our first hearing was before the Judiciary Committee. We waited 8 to 9 hours to be heard. They expected us to leave, get tired and leave. We waited until we were heard. There was only 4 or 5 women of us who testified to this issue. We were at that moment, at that committee meeting, we were approved to move forward with House Bill 2570. And we were also given some appropriation money of $100,000. Now, other legislators who were waited with us because they were curious to know what this committee was going to respond, everybody said, we're shocked. We're shocked at this committee by moving this forward, even giving you some appropriation. So that was a big win for us. And it was a big, it began our movement. So with that, we did a lot of study, and I want to share with you those numbers as well. But we also changed MMIWG to include P for people, because during our interviews and our study during House Bill 2570, we had individuals who wanted to share their story who were men and boys and who were also transgender. So we wanted to ensure that we were inclusive to all gender identities, all our population, you know, so this is the reason why we changed it to people. And it's being changed nationally as well. So what we found, ASU Research on Violent Victimization did a lot of the state data collection of what was going on, and the National Missing Identified System, what they do is that it's a public information system as well, into where families can enter their loved one who has been missing. And this is the only one that is public friendly, that anybody could enter if a person was missing. But in here in July of 2020, when we looked at this, we did find 12 females and 34 males that were missing that were Indigenous. Our women ranged from 20 to 54 years of age. And we also found that women were missing almost twice as long as men. Our average age was 21 years old of our women, and men average was 12 years. So we do know that, you know, we're missing everywhere, right? But here in Arizona, we found a majority that were missing within our Maricopa and Navajo counties, which are a couple of our largest counties in Arizona. So that's just some information that we can share with you today. But in our report, you know, with ASU, they were able to publish a booklet on this study. But this is another House bill that not only created our study committee, but it mandated some recommendations to reduce this issue here. But we also, it took a lot of work to get governor to get on our bandwagon. It took several meetings, it took several, you know, just discussions as legislators to get them to support us. But it also brought together our tribal leaders. This is the first in history that we have had a state to tribal government relationship. Because we're sovereign as tribal nations, we don't have to be a part of our state and our feds, right? But this is the first issue, the first topic, the first House bill we were seeing that government to government relationship. So we've made a huge impact, not only in the state, but also our tribal leadership. So in some of the data that we collected, you know, a lot of individuals, we didn't know about what was happening in these homicides, right? We didn't know, like, what was the victim offender relationships, especially surrounding homicides. So what we did know is that a majority of our perpetrators were unknown. And we talk about this because they didn't identify the person to be, you know, of course, they're gone, they can't tell us. But when we go back and talk through investigation, nobody has said, this is who did it, right? It could be fear, it could be all of these reasons why. But when it's documented, a majority of these cases, the offender was unknown, which was very, not hard to accept, but frustrating to accept, you know, because we wanted to know what was happening and we just didn't have the information. So part of the study as well was that we talked to survivors, we talked to our tribal communities, our law enforcement agencies, to learn from them what are they currently doing on this issue and how are they addressing this issue and are they improving some of the policies. So we did find in several municipalities within Arizona, and even our mortuary, not our mortuary, but our ME's office, medical examiner's office. What was happening was that they didn't have a check mark for Native American. It was white, African American, Hispanic, and other. Those were the 4 categories, right? So any crime that had happened, we were always other, right? What was interesting though, is that in the ME's office, they shared with us that they don't know sometimes the identity and they don't have driver's license or any kind of ID or nobody's able to identify them, but they can categorize them if they had a Native American tattoo to become Native, right? So many of you are not Native, but you might have an interest in the Native tattoo, right? So you get that tattoo, but you're not Native, but they identify you as Native American because you have that tattoo, right? So it was very, I was upset because I didn't even know how to respond. I wish, and Representative Jermaine and I talk about this, like, I just can't get over that day we were there, you know, for them to say this. But the interesting part, and I might gross you, but they did say, I'm gonna take you to a room and I'm gonna pull out this section. These are all women. These are all women with black hair and brown skin. And I have to be understanding because once they pulled out these bodies, I couldn't identify if they were Native American or Hispanic either. We all looked alike. They all looked alike. So it brought us back to
Or Jane Doe's.
the Jane Doe's. It brought us back to the reality of their challenges as well, right? In identifying. So, you know, this it's mind blowing, and yes, we would think like they should know, right? As family, we expect these agencies to know what they're doing too, right? These are our loved ones. But in these type of cases, it's a number, it's a Jane Doe, and I talked to MEs and how can you do this work? I talked to mortuaries, how can you do this work? It's a business, is what I've been told, and it's a business for all of us and our families, that these situations do happen. There has to be a place for them to, and this is where it is. And for us, traditionally, we have a time period of where we bury our loved ones. And when we go beyond this time period, their soul is just wandering, is what we believe, right? So, and we also don't agree with autopsy. But once it's a crime, we have no choice that an autopsy happens. So there's a whole cultural reason behind it. I'm Hopi. And for us, we don't do that to our loved one who has passed. It's almost opening their spirit to be elsewhere. It's the belief. But when it's a crime, we have to best support that family and say, this is a process. That's my best explanation ever to a family. I'm sorry, it's a process, but if we find foul play, at least something has happened, and working at that closure. So also, LaCroix Milligan of Tucson, a consulting firm, won the bid to do this work with us. And I did not want to be a committee member of the ad hoc committee because I would not have access to a lot of information. And I wouldn't be able to coordinate some of what we're currently doing. And I also wanted to ensure this was victim trauma informed, that we also had a Native American staff, part of the consulting firm. And we made it happen. I became the interviewer of hearing these stories. And through this, we were able to interview 37 individuals. This graph shows you, the individuals that had family members that were murdered. These cases that are missing are actual survivors who were missing. And then we're able to interview families and survivors who were missing and murdered. So, majority of them were women because that was our target population. But those that called and said, I want to also share my story, we did listen to them. And it was a time during COVID. Our plan was to go onto the reservations and do these interviews, and we're going to reach all of our 22 tribes. Then COVID happened, and we had 3 months to complete before we had to submit. So we weren't able to go onto reservations. We were able to do it virtually through Zoom. And some tribes don't have the capacity to be able to have Wi-Fi sometimes, or they did not have access to a laptop or anything like that. And their best option was Facebook video. So some of our interviews happened that way. So as a result of these interviews and some of our findings, we had 160 Indigenous women and girls that were known to be murdered between this time period, 1976 to 2018. And it on average, we also found that, as mentioned earlier, women were missing twice as long as men in Arizona. But I mentioned earlier as well, the length of time that a woman or girl was missing was 22 years. That was longer than our men, right? But we also looked at who commits missing and murdered. Again, the unknown offender. But then right next below that were our intimate partners, who were also involved in their loved one that was missing and or murdered. Acquaintances, family and friends. It's gonna be interesting, this research, because we have an increase of our substance use facilities that are fraudulently recruiting Native American people to go into their centers, using their access for benefit. This instance that we're working on right now, this individual is a victim of that. And she was able to escape, and she was able to find somewhere to be last night. But now we're trying to place her in another safe place. And that's what was happening. They were using her access insurance. They were holding her hostage, so she did not leave the home, right? So we're also finding that these homes don't have to be licensed through the state of Arizona. And so this is something as a committee that we're working on to strengthen some of these laws and these codes and these eligibility portions and whatever access has, you know, and minimizing some of those examples that are happening and stories that are happening. But we also have we've recovered in sex trafficking. Our youngest one was 4-month-old that we recovered from trafficking. Our oldest was 68 years old. And everybody else in between, right? So in comparison to those who are missing and murdered, it's about the same age too. I think we identified again that 4-month to 67 years old of missing. But we know that our women and girls are missing 2 times longer than men, as stated earlier. But also I wanted to share with you that in addition to all of these, you know, our homicide rates over time has increased. In 2017, it was our highest. This is when the movement started. This is where we were identifying the factual basis of Indigenous women who were missing and murdered. But you'll see that throughout time, we were still seeing it, right? I'm gonna see a trend of it increasing.
I'm sorry. I just want to, when you're saying missing for that long, are you finding them and are you supposed to be finding people that are just still living, or finding people that are passed away? I mean, that's what you're like after the 12 or the 22 years or 21, whatever years.
So
When you recover them, what does that mean?
okay, so the first question was when they're missing from the type of the official reporting of a family member saying that they've been missing. So time has passed, we still not have found them. So it could be up, you know, we're averaging 22 years. So
You find
either we're
people that are
finding
still-
them live or
Oh,
we're
yeah.
finding them murdered.
Okay.
Or,
You do find
or
some people that are
we
still
do
living
have
that
found.
long.
Yeah. And oftentimes they're again, the substance use. And it's for substance use. The drug of choice has been meth. Now it's fentanyl, which now results in SMI, seriously mental ill challenges. So they might not know or understand or remember their family, right? But also, you know, when we say this age group as well, you know, we had to look at what was our youngest that we know and aware of and our oldest, right? So when we say recovery, like for ours, this person, her family had identified her as missing, right? But she finally came out and shared where she was last week. So she's no longer missing now. The challenge in all of this, an adult missing person can go missing. They don't have to tell anybody where they are. There is not a crime against it. There is not a law against it. That an adult person can be missing. Now, where it becomes a crime is when it's sex trafficking, abuse, or murder, right? But we don't want to get there. You know, we want to be able to find a way to recover, and we do say recoveries. Our recovery team, we always have a survivor. We always have an advocate. We have our driver, and we plan how we're going to do this. It's it might look like we're kidnapping this individual too, but we're already having conversation to them prior to us recovering. I don't like to call it rescue because we're not rescuing an individual, right? What we're doing is we're recovering them, and we want them to understand as well that they're a victim and a survivor. You know, and this survivor word is very powerful. Once I have them in my vehicle, they're no longer a victim to me. They're a survivor. They survive whatever they've experienced, and now they're in a safe place. But I have to remind them, if we go through the criminal justice process, you will be identified as a victim. It's just within the criminal justice system, right? But this word survivor is very powerful. And because that's what they're doing. They're surviving, right? They've survived.
Empowered them.
Right, exactly. But in addition to our men, I mean, our women and girls, you know, we also have our men and boys. And what we did find is, you know, although there's a lot of similarities, we're also seeing that our cases of murder of our Indigenous men and boys are increasing in the recent years. We used to believe that it was women and girls who were missing and murdered much more higher, right? It's our men and boys now that we're identifying to be higher. Another reason why we changed the WG to P, because we wanted to see what was happening with them. But you know, over the last 40 years, there were 474 cases that was actually documented. Much more greater than that, probably 10 times more, I can imagine, right? But again, because of the lack of data and data sharing, we don't have those true accurate numbers. And also, you know, we're a lot of these cases are not yet resolved. My theory as well is, again, going back to, you see homeless individuals, right? They're addicted. They develop SMIs from being homeless, from these drugs that they use. Sometimes they don't even know who they are. When we talk to he talks to them on the streets more than I do. But when you talk to them and I listen to conversations, sometimes you can quickly identify, I'm not a physician, but I know some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. I know some of the symptoms of these other SMIs that sometimes they don't know who they are themselves. You know, so it's sad, but at the same time, it's hard to recover them too, because this is all they know. For example, I have a brother who's a younger brother who's on the streets. He knows how to survive on the streets. He could die at any time because of the cirrhosis that he has. On the street, he gets his belly bloats. He's oh gosh, I got the yellowness, jaundice on the streets, right? But it's at every moment that the doctor says you always come to the emergency room near death. Then they do the treatment stuff, right? They relive him and everything. He goes to my niece for a week. He stays for a little bit, gets cleaned up, gets sober, but the craving he can't overcome. It comes to where my niece gives him a can of beer to help that, right? And they do that in the hospital. I never knew they did that until I experienced this with my brother. But he don't want to live. He don't want to go back to my mom's, but we learned that he was also molested twice. And that's his issue, right? So I always share that, you know, there's this surface issue of substance abuse of these individuals, but their trauma, they're not addressing, right? It's just constantly stirring. To mask all of this, they're using alcohol or substances, right? To be able to help them live, really, and forget about what had happened to them. And I only can imagine these homeless people having these same experiences. and these are some things that we want to be able to address as well by giving them that therapeutic care. But they have to want it too, right? We're not going to force somebody, but we can offer the services. But in addition, when I talk about the correlation of missing persons, it's also human trafficking.
Before you go on, I just wanted to add the numbers that she was showing. Again, those were just numbers that were reported. Those are not necessarily accurate because it looks very small for a 40-year study, right? But those are just what was reported and not what actually is happening. So the numbers are probably astronomical. Figure out how many people don't report.
So with human trafficking, we know that there's coercion involved. It's coercion for a person to do a sex act for something of value, right? So we think of oftentimes individuals who are sex trafficked to do for money. That's the most popular. Anybody else think of anything else that could be a reason of something of value? Identification, green card, freedom. Somebody back here. Organs. Mhm. So one of the things that we found, not just in Indian country, but everywhere as well, is that it's what they call survival trafficking. Survival trafficking is food, fuel, in Indian country, trafficking our children for wood, coal, and these are some instances that we see, stories that we've heard, so anything of value is what we educate about. Anything of value could mean anything. Whatever an individual think anything of value is, it could be their own personal belongings too, to buy clothing, we currently I'm working with some of our college students who are also getting into dating work, right? So they're in dating services, their dates are paying for tuition, for books, for their rent, for their utilities. But once they graduate or they try to leave, they're now saying, I paid all of this for you, you're not going nowhere. So these are some instances. So then now it turns into trafficking, right? It could be at their own choice that they're doing dating services, but the benefits that they get from it is much more long-term, and they use that to coerce them. So it becomes trafficking. But many of our students don't want to report because they lose everything. Many of us don't have the financial means to pay for a full college career, right? We have to apply for scholarships and financial aid, but when the added benefits of doing dating services allows us, and I always share this with our indigenous communities, we don't do vacations. We don't go to the beach. We don't go to another country, what many people consider vacation, and we joke about it. My vacation is taking 5 days to go to ceremony. That's harder work. So we try to make these comparisons and what that means to us. To purchase a Louis bag, he can't afford it. But those aren't, for us as Indigenous people, that wasn't what we knew. That wasn't what we wanted. But we come to the city and we see all of these things and clothing and shoes and jewelry and all of these things. We want to be a part of that, right? So those are some things that these traffickers entice us with. So, that's when I talk about vulnerability, that's that vulnerability I'm talking about, is wow, this guy's gonna get me this, my college students say that. I've never had a Gucci, but now I got this, look, they're showing it off, but I have to bring it back to reality. What did you do for that though? And can you go home tomorrow? The answer is always no. I already have a date on this day, and so these are some of the examples that are happening.
Also, there's examples of, a trafficker getting a woman pregnant, they have a good relationship. He becomes pregnant, he then now holds the baby hostage and says, if you want to see the baby, you're gonna do these tricks for me or whatever. That happens quite a bit now. And also, another type of trafficking, without a skip one line right now. But sorry to interrupt, I just wanted to, show that point, because that is happening quite a bit, and it's scary. They're marrying into certain tribes and then, getting into the tribe and then forcing them to get their per cap or their benefits, stuff like that as well.
So how does it happen? And not just for sex trafficking, but you also have to be open-minded and think about how are they luring individuals off reservation or even from your own homes, as they create these relationships, these boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, or these intimate partner relationships. Throughout the process, they're also learning about your family. How many brothers and sisters do you have and cousins do you have? Where do you live? Where do your most immediate family live? And then they groom you. They groom you through making sure that you have this idea of this exotic life, right? Once you gain this trust and with this individual, and they'll show you and pour everything out to you. I've learned from survivors that, it's a good life, and they could do this for 6 months to a year, right? And you're in this relationship, but once they totally capture you, so you have this trust with them, then they begin to isolate you. They tell you you can't go visit your family, you can't have cell phones, you can't talk to so-and-so. If you have a cell phone, I'm gonna be right there with you talking to so-and-so. Then they start using manipulative conversations, coercion, they tell you they love you, then they beat you, right? They tell you they love you, but they allow you to go have sex with another person. And then now, the exploitation is much more greater. Again, that gaining something of value, whether it's cash, now it's guns, drugs, we know that's happening. We see it happening. So these are just some of the ways that it happens. Here's just another visual here, and how they're maintaining control of their victim. So I have this up here. I like to ensure that I respect and honor my survivors. They say, we want you to tell your audience the difference between prostitution and sex trafficking. We're not prostituting, right? So the biggest difference is that we do have individuals, what we call independent workers. We don't call them prostitutes. We don't even use the word prostitute in our work. We call them independent workers. They're out there working on their own. They receive their own cash or whatever it is that they're getting. But, trafficking survivors, they may hold the cash, but they're instantly transferring it, right? Or their John is giving it directly to the trafficker. And sometimes they don't even get to hold whatever they're working for. And it doesn't always have to be that violent trafficker. We don't use the word pimp anymore. We want to identify who they are, and they are traffickers. So we use the word trafficker. We on the streets in Phoenix, there are several areas that we go, and a majority of them are not independent workers. Majority of them are being trafficked. And on the side of the streets, you will see their pimps And sometimes pimps huddle around. They have their own, all their vehicles and they're all talking and whatever, but they know their boundaries, but I don't even talk to them. Sometimes he does. But we have to be careful in what we're doing on the streets as well. But we always inform law enforcement that we're out there doing outreach or we're out there doing recovery. So we don't do this, on our own. We have to have somebody know we're out there. What if something happens to us, right? So somebody has to know we are out there, what vehicles we're in, how many we have, and so forth, who we're looking for. So it works. It's been working. We pray every day and every night before we go and do this. We're just leaving it up to him, like just get us home safely. Even our parents don't know exactly what we do because we don't want to scare them either, right? So, and when I talk about the correlation of missing and murdered, with missing, it could be an abduction, it could be forced, it could be voluntary. We see a lot of modeling agencies here in the Valley. Arizona Mills is a hot spot for traffickers. And all of these promises, like I said, and it could be all kind of promises, education. And we're so vulnerable, not just as women, but even our young boys, our young men. We just want a good life, right? We want to be taken care of, and this is what survivors tell us. I did it because I believed he was going to take care of me, like a husband would or a boyfriend would. But we also are identifying the smugglers, especially where you all are at the border, right? Smuggling is happening not just for drugs and weapons, but also human, right? So when I worked with BIA, I worked closely with Border Patrol, and we were seeing crazy human smuggling and where they were hiding these individuals. I actually saw a young man that was hidden on the dashboard. He was laying on the dashboard. I also saw an individual who was inside of the engine. And you imagine how hot that would get, right? And he did have burns, but it wasn't severe. So those are some instances that I have personally have seen of how they're smuggling individuals. It's not always necessarily the is that her? Okay, go ahead. Just tell her you're with me.
Well, I heard.
So why do they stay or not come home? Again, back to that debt bondage, they feel like they owe them, right? And their trafficker will tell them, you do owe me. You owe me thousands of dollars. And it's surprising how they calculate things. It's just not buying things, it's their housing, it's their cell phone use, little things they charge them with, right? But they also have the ability to control and take away their passports and their identification. So we've had several survivors say, I didn't have my ID and I wanted to go report. And that's the first thing they asked me. Who are you? Can I see your identification? They didn't have it, so they walk away. But for the most part, it's fear and protecting their family that they don't get out of this. And then the drug alcohol dependency. How long do we have? Okay, it's ready. Okay. So, okay. So, this slide here, is victims only see one way out. One, they become unprofitable because of their trauma. So their traffickers don't want them anymore, right? So they just boot them out. Especially as we get older, or Brandon has shared, with the traffickers that he worked with, we age, women age, and once we're no use, they just get rid of us, and they leave us out there with nothing. He mentioned the pregnancy. Once you become pregnant, they'll let you go, but they also tried to self-abort the baby by beating. Our good friend and survivor, she's got a book out that talks about that. She was beaten to abort her baby, that she was pregnant with her trafficker. But the second time she got pregnant, she kept the baby. And then her friend that was also recruited to be part of their family, she became pregnant and he beat her to where he murdered her because of the complication of the beating and the pregnancy. And she bled internally as a result, and she had passed. But the end result is, and unfortunately is death. And this is how they're getting out. And we want to be able to be part of their recovery before it gets to death, right? But within that, there's also the services. What services can we provide for this individual so that it's not only victim-centered trauma informed, but the services that we're referring to are also victim trauma informed, because many are not, right? They just want to provide the service, but they're not yet ready to share exactly what happened until they've developed that trust. On average, a survivor tells me, I don't trust nobody until at least 6 months. If they keep working with me, if they have an interest in me, then little more that they share in working on their trauma. But it's a process for them. It takes a while before they actually trust anybody. But some of the common problems that we see in our survivors are all of these that are listed. We do see a lot of suicide ideations, especially when it comes to family reunification. The shame that they have because they blame them for everything, especially if they left their children to go to with their experiences. Even their children blame them and shame them, right? So that's probably the hardest area that we deal with right now, is just wanting them to take their own life because they just feel like their family and the children don't love them. But it takes a lot of work from all of us to be able to identify these areas. They don't think about it, right? They don't think about what their ailments are. It's always the physical ailments that they feel most, and that's what they address most. But we don't go deeper into the emotional or psychological processes with them. And those are the trainings that we're trying to also encourage within our clinical care and our therapists, and they're the only ones who know how to do that. We don't. I'm not a therapist or a counselor. I don't even get into that, but I can only support them if they go through it. So not sure how many of you guys are even here at the university. The university, talking to your students or even your classmates, and identifying some of their experiences that they might go through. The general public thinks at universities and colleges, our students have the ability to make their own decisions. They're getting educated, right? But there's many of us who are experiencing something in our life, and we need to know how to have these conversations. We're sitting at the library, you see someone crying, something is happening. They're not just crying because they're happy, right? So let's ask, let's see what's going on. And having a plan. We go to the healthcare center and we see are you a domestic violence victim? Are you safe at home? We see, but what does that really mean? Survivors don't like that button at all, because they're only addressing, they feel like they're being nosy, but at the same time, as a healthcare system, we want that to be visible because whoever is wearing that button, you can talk to, right? That's the idea. But survivors don't feel that, and we have to find a way into how we're going to create or develop this immediate trust that they have with us to be able to share some information. But I also want to share with you, we're almost done here. some of my survivor testimony of people who have been missing and families who have loved ones missing. You know, one of the impactful things is what was said to me was, you don't heal if you don't have an answer. And this was from a person who had lost a loved one. And, you know, a person who is missing, or even murdered, our family as family, we don't know the answers. And how do we move on with our healing when we can't even say what happened to our loved one, right? So we try to help them understand and give them some options of their healing in terms of their acceptance of, you know, whether it's traditional burial or whatever burial services that they choose. That, you know, for us culturally, burying a whole body is very healing for us, knowing that we buried our loved one and their whole body. And I say this because my mother, her husband was missing. A dog brought his skull to a home, did DNA, and it was my mom's husband. My mom to this day has not fully healed and accepted his death because it was only his skull. And it was only his skull that she buried and his family buried. So, you know, for her belief is his soul is still out there somewhere and hasn't gone on to the next world. And as much as we tell her, you know, we did everything that we could to spiritually and culturally connect him to the spirit world, in her mind, it was just his skull. It wasn't everything else. But culturally, we also say once an individual has passed, it's not about the body anymore. It's not the person, it's their spiritual and their soul, you know, and my mom just can't accept that as much as she told us, you know, this is what it is about. But, you know, it's very challenging and hard for her to understand that, and imagine how many people also experience this, right? So one of the things one of the areas I'm also work with is the ASU School of Research and on Violent Victimization. For this current study that we're doing, we're inviting individuals, although it's due today, we're extending it to the end of this month, a call for art to be included into our report. And also, you know, if you like to be a part of our planning for our May 5th event, we host the Missing and Murdered Indigenous People Awareness Day at the state capitol on May 5th. Welcome you all to join. If you'd like to be a part of planning, we certainly would like to have you involved in that. And we're currently interviewing ASU students on their experiences on violence and victimization, and just learning from them as well, you know, their own resiliencies. So we're trying to, we intended to do this to all our NAU, U of A, ASU, and GCU, but we didn't receive a response from the IRB processes at the universities to do this. So we started with ASU. Eventually, we'll come back out to our other sister universities because we know people are experiencing this as well. And we want our students to know and understand that, you know, they're here for a purpose, for education, but they have these experiences as well that might hinder them, or not necessarily hinder them, but learn more about it because they might know another person, right? So these are some education efforts that we're trying to do as well. And also increase our responses on university and our campuses for our students in terms of counseling services or any kind of services that they might need that's relating to some of their victimization or even their just concerns of different areas. So that ends my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions, but we are here until about 2-3 o'clock if you guys have additional questions. Thank you, Zoom participants, for joining us.
Before everybody logs off the Zoom, I just want to say thank you to Valaura. And I wanted to remind you all in the chat, we put a survey because we're trying to collect some data. When it's under Wendy Hoag's name because Zoom wouldn't let me log in. So if you please fill out that survey, we greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to look to see if there's any questions here. In the Zoom, or does anybody? I don't see any hands up in Zoom. Do we have any questions for Valaura? Oh, one new message. Oh, Wendy just put the link to the survey again. No questions? Then I'd like to thank everybody and say,
Yeah, thank you.
go have lunch. And for those who are here, and I'm going to end the Zoom for right now. Thank you all very much.